Good morning, everyone. It's about 11 a.m. It is October 26, 2025. We welcome all of you for this next session, session number 5 of Martha Root. We are very happy to welcome Ms. Violetta Zane once more for this 5th session. Ms. Violetta Zane, for those who are just joining, is an artist, graphic designer. She is the researcher, writer, presenter who is providing all of these slides with the content on it, thousands of hours of work for all of us to learn about Martha Root, her life, who she was, what she stood for, and furthermore, we welcome Miss Violetta Zane
Great.
and we welcome you, all of you who are joining us, the reason why we're all here. One point for all of you to consider. If you're interested in seeing this content, and not just this content, but the stories of the Bab, Abdul Baha, Shoya Effendi, the greatest holy leaf, Baha'u'llah, you can find them on the Clearwater Baha'i's YouTube channel, but you can also go to Baha'íChronologies.com. You can find Violetta's work there in English and French. Gosh, I was about to say Farsi.
Thank you so much, John.
Welcome, Violetta. We're so happy
Thank
to have you.
you.
Once more, Baha'íChronologies.com. The community of Clearwater welcomes you once more, Violetta. Let's begin.
Great. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. So here and here, 1 second. I have to hide the controls. And all right. Martha Root, Part 5, Torchbearer. Chapter 1, 1920 to 1920. It's actually 1919 to 1921. So 15th and 16th of November, 1919, 24 hours of rest. 5 months after leaving Cambridge Springs for her historic South American adventure, Martha arrived home on the 15th of November, 1919. T.T. Root, her beloved father, was 82 years old, and he had been waiting anxiously to see his only daughter, watching from the window of his home. Martha had just made Baha'i history as the first to arise and prosecute the tablets of the divine plan. And true to Martha Root, she did not even take 24 hours to take stock of her extraordinary historic achievements. The very next day, on 16th of November, 1919, Martha went to the Cambridge Springs High School and began taking Spanish lessons, adamant that she was going to communicate with her new friends in South America in their own language. Then she wrote 400 letters, sent 1,000 pamphlets in Spanish, $9,000 in today's currency worth of Baha'i books. 2 Baha'is were now teaching the faith in South America, and Martha's Portuguese friends had printed 5,000 blue booklets in Portuguese, and she had shared 1,000 South American contacts to American Baha'is for them to become their new pen pals. Martha's Baha'i activities from 1920 to 1921. For 7 months, starting in the spring of 1920, Martha booked and advertised all of the East Coast speaking engagements for this man, Janabi Fazili Mazindarani, a renowned Persian scholar sent to the United States by Abdul Baha. This is an article about one of Fazili Mazindarani's talks, and it's most probably the marketing and publicity work of Martha Root. Martha also had another important responsibility between November 1920 and the 18th of March 1921. She was appointed to the Ideas Committee, a task force tasked with finding creative ways to raise money for, as you see here, the construction of the House of Worship in Wilmette. A very important role that she played was as part of the committee headed by Agnes Parsons at the request of Abdul Baha to organize the Race Amity Convention, a convention to unite the white and black races in America. Martha Root handled the extensive publicity and printed 19,000 programs to be distributed. The convention was a huge success and had a long-term positive effect. This is a photograph of the Race Amity Convention in 1921. Martha's cancer returned in 1921, the year of Abdu'l-Bahá's ascension, and the symptoms were very painful as it had spread to her chest and stomach. She did not consult doctors, but she would have to slow down her pace of work when the pain became unbearable. The cancer would never leave Martha alone again. January 27th, 1920, Abdu'l-Bahá's tablet to Martha Root. During her journey to South America, Martha had sent Abdu'l-Bahá amazingly detailed reports of every single thing she did. The cities, the geographical and cultural settings, newspapers, libraries, schools, who got Baha'i literature, who she met, the places she spoke. And then Abdu'l-Bahá, after she'd returned home, he responded to all of this by acknowledging the historic achievement that she'd done. And the tablet he revealed for her was absolutely stunning and was a turning point in Martha Root's life. It is clear and evident that the power of the kingdom is aiding thee, that the glances of the eye of his loving kindness are turned towards thee. The hosts of the supreme concourse are helping thee, and the power of the Holy Spirit is supporting thee. Before long, the results of this mighty undertaking will be uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of all men. Therefore, be thou assured that this call to the manifestation of Baha'u'llah, this proclamation of the word of God, and the promulgation of his covenant shall influence stone and clay, how much more the children of men. In brief, thou art really a herald of the kingdom, a harbinger of the covenant. Thou art self-sacrificing and showing kindness to all the peoples of the earth. Thou art now sowing a seed that in the long run will yield thousands of harvests. Thou art now planting a tree that shall everlastingly put forth leaves, blossoms, and fruit, and whose shadow shall grow in magnitude day by day. Martha Root and Eugene Debs. Eugene Debs was the best-known American socialist of his time. He was a political activist, a trade unionist, and a renowned public speaker, and the 5-time presidential candidate of the Socialist Party. This is a poster for his presidential campaign in 1912. On June 16th, 1918, and this picture is exactly at this moment, Eugene Debs delivered the most famous speech of his life, denouncing American participation in World War I. Eugene Debs was subsequently arrested, charged with 10 counts of sedition and violating the Espionage Act of 1917, and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Martha Root was an ardent supporter of Eugene Debs and admired his commitment to defending the rights and dignity of working people and promoting a fairer, more humane society. Martha called him one of the great souls that I have met. People believe in the Baha'i cause through deeds, not words. Mr. Debs is living his life for the oneness of humanity. Lincoln could not have been more sincere, more thoughtful, more kind, more strong than this beautiful soul. I love his character and look upon him as one of my dearest brothers. Martha visited Eugene Debs at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary in April and October of 1921. She brought him books on the Baha'i point of view on business and labor. She wrote to him and his brother Theodore, his right-hand man, for over a year. She advocated on his behalf to certain parts of the government. She wrote articles about him, and she showed him great kindness and deep respect. After Debs was released from prison by President Harding on the 25th of December, 1921, according to Martha's biographer, Mabel Garris, he called attention to the Baha'i faith and its teachings. This is a photograph of Debs the day his sentence was commuted. Chapter 2, Martha's Third Journey. October, November 1921, Tennessee and Texas. For her second teaching journey, Martha chose Central America and traveled south from Cambridge Springs to Washington, D.C., and spoke in both Atlanta and Memphis, and then Austin, Texas. Martha stayed with Anna Renke, a skilled seamstress who was in her previous life a shepherder with a flock of 1,000 sheep. And she and Martha made a formidable teaching team, publishing articles and speaking everywhere. And their work was reported in the press, as you see in these 2 articles and these 3 articles. Now, an exciting moment during Martha's stay in Texas was when Anna took her to her hometown Bee Cave, 40 kilometers, 25 miles away from Austin. At 10:30 p.m., after the Texas Jigs on the Saturday night dance, Martha taught the faith to Texan cowboys. And not only did they show interest, this was the very first time the Baha'i faith was being proclaimed in Bee Cave. 7th of November, 1921. Martha arrived in Mexico City on the 7th of November, 1921. She is a very studious Martha, had been brushing up on her Spanish, so she could communicate with people, but she always used interpreters to avoid misunderstandings. Martha didn't know a single person in Mexico, and her first call was to this man, President Alvaro Obregón. She gave President Obregón's secretary several documents and several compilations about the faith, and a famous blue booklet, and then she gave him something called the Covenant Photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá. I did a little bit of digging, and this is the Covenant Photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá. It's a photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá taken in 1915 that has the words Center of the Covenant, the greatest branch, Abdu'l-Bahá Abbas, and a quote of Baha'u'llah on the covenant at the bottom. It was published by the National Assembly of the United States, and they printed a lot of them and they offered them for sale for the Baha'is. Martha's most interesting talk, and this is a photograph of Mexico City in the 20s. Martha's most interesting talk during this time in Mexico City was at a Catholic school for 200 girls. The reason this is interesting is because while she was talking, the girls were taking furious notes. And the reason is that their teacher had changed their final exam. Instead of being an exam, their final would be how accurately they summarized Martha's talk on the women of the Orient. So Martha was an exam in Mexico. On Martha's last day in Mexico City, she met the only Baha'i in the country, C.P. Forrest, and I don't have a picture of him. C.P. Forrest was from Palestine originally. He'd learned about the faith in New York 5 years before, and he came to Mexico and set up a business. And as he was asking Martha about the health of Abdu'l-Bahá, his tears welled up. Martha left Mexico City and traveled for 3 weeks north, south, east, and west in the country. When she arrived in Guadalajara, she had a beautiful description of the city. It was a city of 40,000 before Chicago was even a fort. The winsomeness of its climate and the charm of its people have given it the name the Pearl of the Occident. During her brief stay in Guadalajara, Martha managed to convince a magazine editor to include a chapter on the Baha'i faith in a book he was writing, and met an official who had been working for the British Army. He was a British official who worked in Ottoman Palestine during World War I. And not only had he met Abdu'l-Bahá, he was also a friend of Wesley Tudor Pole, a very well-known English Baha'i. The most colorful person that Martha met in Guadalajara was an incredible woman who was a pioneer in the Mexican prison reform movement and had established the first women's club, organized concerts, and Martha called her the female Carnegie. She loved this woman's opinion about religion. If people have any, let them show it by doing something. Martha stayed with important people in Mexico. In Puebla, not far from Mexico City, she was the guest of a congresswoman's wife, and in Veracruz, she stayed with the governor. She only spent 1 day in Veracruz, but met 4 politicians. Officials in Mexico City told Martha it was too dangerous to travel by train to Guatemala. But a couple of things here. One is Martha doesn't like being told what she can't do. That's one. And two, she didn't even hear them speak because she had had a vision in which Abdul Baha assured her he would send someone with her. So Martha bought her ticket at 4 p.m., got on the train at 9 p.m., and just a little bit later, 40 soldiers boarded the train to protect the passengers. Martha took it as a sign. November, December 1921, Guatemala. Martha arrived in Guatemala City on Wednesday, November 23rd, 1921. She went straight to the presidential palace to try to get an appointment with President Carlos Herrera and received an appointment card that read, Monday or Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. at the palace. Martha showed up, of course, on Monday, the 27th of October, but was asked to return on Tuesday. That very night, machine guns went on in the entire city. The palace was swarmed by 500 guards, and President Herrera and his cabinet were locked in the palace. The coup had begun. Martha made a very, very funny comment in her article about this trip. But the Baha'i message has also been given to the liberals, some of the very men who next day went into offices under the new government. And Martha had covered all her bases politically. After 2 steady days of bombings, Martha traveled to the coast, and on Thursday, December 1st, 1921, she sailed to New Orleans, where she spent a week teaching the faith and making contacts. Chapter 3, 1921-1922. 28th of November, 1921, the Ascension of Abdul Baha. The most dangerous night of Martha's third journey had been the night of November 27th to November 28th, in the middle of the night, during the start of the coup against President Carlos Herrera. When she got back to the United States, Martha realized that was the very night Abdul Baha had passed away. 28th of November, 1921, The Guardian. With the ascension of Abdul Baha on the 28th of November, 1921, the heroic age of the Baha'i dispensation had come to an end, and the formative age had been ushered in. In his will and testament, Abdul Baha unequivocally appointed Shoghi Effendi as his legitimate successor and guardian of the cause of Baha'u'llah, and Martha Root would serve him as she had served Abdul Baha, with undying loyalty and unflagging energy. 3rd of November, 1922, the passing of T.T. Root. In early October 1922, after a lovely summer spent with Martha, T.T. Root came down with a severe case of bronchitis, which developed into pleurisy and just continued to worsen. Timothy T. Root passed away just before midnight in the night of 3rd of November, 1922, at the age of 85. Martha had very often referred to her father as a wonderful Baha'i because he encouraged her to carry out her Baha'i work and was always willing to stay home alone while she did. After the family and friends had gone, Martha dropped a single white rose in her father's grave, which you see here on this slide. After his passing, Martha wrote a very moving tribute to her beloved, adored father. He was a wonderful father to live with. He did not take everything for granted. The little courtesies in the home were never forgotten. What a father means to a son, only a son can tell you, but the camaraderie between father and daughter is a holy treasure. He was pure in heart and absolutely selfless. No matter what his daughter's faults were, he saw her only as perfect, and he was always intensely loyal. And with it all, every day, he was just the same gentle, lovely, and lovable person. Once the family squabbles over her father's estate were settled, Martha came away with some money and property, which would yield some income for her and which would allow her to travel. What broke her heart, though, was that Martha had only really wanted her father's camel hair sweater, and she didn't get it. And so in tears, she confided in Lucy, her closest friend in Cambridge Springs. Was that too much to ask? Free. Martha instantly knew that her life had changed with the passing of her father. With TT gone, nothing was holding her back. Nothing was tethering her to Cambridge Springs or to the United States. That restlessness that had been stirring within her since she became a Baha'i, she had constantly kept it in check for over a decade out of love for an attachment to her father. But now that restlessness could finally be unloosed into the world. And she told her friends, now I can begin my real work. Martha's almost instant decision was to leave the United States for the longest unbroken journey of her entire life. 4 months after her father's passing, she would travel non-stop for a full 7 years, 11 months, and 2 days to 56 countries and 200 cities for getting rest and composure, and would bring the faith to a queen. The legend of Martha Root was born. Chapter 4, Preparations for the Fourth Journey. The aim of Martha's life. In a letter to a friend, Martha, who you see here sitting on a suitcase, gave us what is probably the single most eloquent description of the spiritual power that animated her unstoppable efforts to teach the faith. Abdu'l-Baha, in 6 tablets, told me to go to all parts of the world, all the continents, the easts and the wests, the north and the south. The aim of my life is to fulfill those tablets absolutely. Mabel Garris is, of course, the biographer of Martha Root, and she has this extraordinary sentence in Lioness at the Threshold when she's describing this turning point in Martha Root's life. This is what she says. In December 1922, Martha Root, age 50, left her hometown of Cambridge Springs, Pennsylvania, to take up her residency in the world. On her way to the West Coast, where she was to sail for Japan, that's her itinerary, okay? The National Teaching Committee organized a teaching trip for Martha through the coldest part of America at the coldest time of year. Martha even joked about it in a letter to a friend. I almost freeze to death every winter. Martha started from Toronto to Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Akron, Detroit, Lansing, Champaign-Urbana, Chicago, Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, where she gave 11 talks at 40 below zero, Helena, Butte, Anaconda, Spokane, Portland, and Seattle, where she spoke 13 times. But Martha, look at the publicity. I am not duplicating a single article here. These are articles from all those places. Martha single-handedly generated in every single city she visited an incredible amount of buzz and publicity. Now, I've been asked this several times, so I thought I would address it. How Martha raised money. In addition to her paid work as a journalist, the revenue from her investment in stocks and the inheritance and her property in Cambridge Springs, Martha constantly replenished her ever-diminishing funds by selling valuable personal items and gifts like jewelry and scarves. And before leaving for Japan, Martha sold her personal 6-volume, leather-bound, indexed, and alphabetized collection of Baha'i writings. At the time, the most complete collection of Baha'i holy writings in the world. She was hoping to get $2,800 in today's currency. Now, Martha is going to do this again and again and again and again. And I will mention it every time because I think it's so cool. Chapter 5, Japan. March 22nd to April 10th, 1923, the Kagamaru. On the 22nd of March, 1923, Martha sailed out of Seattle. She had a third-class ticket, but Roy Wilhelm offered her a first-class ticket as a gift and a surprise. She sailed on the Kagamaru towards Yokohama. She was the only American on the ship, and as usual for Martha, she picked the most uncomfortable season to travel because it wasn't cold and it wasn't winter. It was the storms of the spring, which you can see here on the satellite image, and the Kagamaru was pelted with rain, sleet, wind, and a tormented sea. One night at 2 a.m, a huge ocean storm tore off the ship's railing near Martha's cabin, blasted open a porthole, and flooded Martha's luggage and belongings. During the 3-week sailing journey, there was only 1 day of sunshine. Martha was ill for 4 days, confined to bed with fever, chills, and a headache. But on April 8th, 1923, all the passengers and all the crew of the Kagamaru, almost 100 people, gathered to watch Martha's slideshow. She had a huge, very heavy slideshow she took everywhere she went. The captain stood on the stage next to her and interpreted in Japanese during the 1-hour presentation. And the captain loved Martha. Martha also tried to learn Japanese and using chopsticks. And one night during the journey, the captain organized a very special, authentic Japanese dinner with the ship's officers in Martha's honor. On the menu was a Yokohama staple called yunabe, a hot pot dish made with beef simmered in a sauce of miso, soy sauce, and sugar, often served with vegetables and raw egg for dipping. April 10th to 25th, 1923, Japan. On the morning of the 10th of April, the Kagamaru sailed into Yokohama harbor. Martha, it's not that far, but Martha was in Tokyo at 6 p.m., the same day she landed in Yokohama, and gave her talk an hour later at 7 p.m. Martha spent 10 days in Tokyo from April 10th to April 21st, speaking every single day. Agnes Alexander was very touched by Martha's power of attraction. She said, because of Martha's selflessness and devotion, her presence brought confirmations wherever she went. A month after Martha left Japan, the Baha'is of Japan received a letter from the Guardian, which reiterated the sentiments in Abdu'l-Baha's tablet about the role of Martha being to sow seeds that would bloom and bear abundant fruit. But something else happened in Japan. Martha is suspected of being a communist. There was a huge piece of news that broke during Martha's visit to Japan, and it was very widely reported in the American press. You see the headlines here. Japs watch US girl as radical, charge American worker for Soviet, root relative under Jap surveillance, Japs charge kin of root spread Soviet propaganda, relative of Elihu Root asks US embassy for protection, an American woman is shadowed, Root's relative eyed by Japs as Soviet plotter, Soviet foes worry Japan. The content of the article was very scary. From Tokyo, 24th of April, Miss Martha Root of Pittsburgh, a writer, a relative of Elihu Root, and a disciple of the Baha'i movement, is under Japanese surveillance here, suspected of Soviet propaganda. She has been shadowed by detectives since the Esperanto meeting at Yokohama a week ago, when she stated during the course of a lecture that the Baha'i movement was spreading to Russia. The conservative Tokyo Asahi publishes a scarehead revealing a communistic plot, stating that Miss Root is preaching a doctrine practically the same as communism, which is inconsistent with the Japanese government's policy. Miss Root has not been directly questioned, but today appealed to the United States Embassy for protection. She has no intention of offending Japanese officials, she declares, and hopes to succeed in explaining to them why Baha'ism does not menace Japan politically or religiously. It was a really big deal, and it threatened to disrupt Martha's plans, but she was finally allowed to leave. This actually is one of the few photographs taken of Martha in Japan in 1923. This is another photograph of her with Ida Finch, Agnes Alexander, and Mrs. Takeshita. Martha took the whole communistic plot, Soviet propagandist spy incident with a grain of salt. She was very, very unhappy the Baha'i faith had been dragged into it and that it had made the headlines in a negative way. But on the plus side, she had the same attitude as Shoghi Effendi, is that it had actually generated a huge amount of publicity for the faith, and a lot of people heard about the faith through this incident. Martha left Tokyo and lectured in Kyoto, Ayabe, Kobe, and then sailed from Osaka to Beijing. Chapter 6, China. Most of these stunning black and white images in this section are from this amazing website called Historical Photographs of China. April 1923 to March 27th, 1924, a year in China. Before even stepping foot in China, Martha had read everything she could about the country, its people, customs, and cultures, of course, taking her cue from Abdu'l-Baha, who had written a lot about China, and it was her goal in life to get to China. So after years of dreaming about it, the moment finally arrived, and Martha set foot in Beijing in late April 1923 and settled in for a year in China in the most Martha route way you can possibly imagine. After she arrived, she enrolled in a language school, then took a first job as a manager of a small hotel. She took a second job teaching English, a third job tutoring a child. She met the imam of the largest mosque, lectured several times at Yenqing Women's College, then quit the first job she had as a hotel manager and took another job teaching English to a woman Chinese painter in exchange for rent because she was traveling to New York soon. Took a fourth job writing English and Esperanto articles for a newspaper, and a fifth job teaching Esperanto. In the middle of all this working, Martha fell in love with China. There is so much that is radiant, so much that is beautiful. I wish I could send you the charm, the old-time magic, the lovely art, and the picturesqueness of Peking. It is glorious here. No one need ask for any greater favor than to live and die in China. I love China. You will find the Chinese perfectly beautiful souls. Am wonderfully happy here. Between mid-November 1923 and February 1924, Martha had proclaimed the faith in 19 cities in China, but I was only able to find 11. She had ended her travels on third-class trains during, you guessed it, the absolute coldest time of year, February, and arrived in Shanghai with her health devastated. During her stay in China, Martha had experienced a tremendous amount of pain caused by her cancer. At one point in Shanghai, she had been in such agony that she had to lie down for 2 hours a day. Martha was open about the pain, but didn't ever speak about it, identify it. She spoke that she was in pain, but what she says is extremely, just very, very touching. Only the power of the Holy Spirit kept me on this plane. To me, this is a reference to the tablet of Abdu'l-Baha, who tells her that the Holy Spirit was moving her. And to Martha, as the cancer advances, she takes on a spiritual view of her pain. Every time she is in such pain, it is a confirmation to her that Baha'u'llah is moving her forward, because she's in such suffering and agony that only that can explain her moving and continuing. At the end of her tour, she was all alone in Shanghai, in the middle of all that pain and that cold, and she received a loving note from the greatest holy leaf. It was just a little note, we don't have the text of it, but hearing from Baha'u'llah's daughter reinvigorated Martha, and of course she was positively radiant, and on the 27th of March 1924, she packed her bag and sailed down the east coast of China to Hong Kong. April to May 1924, Hong Kong and Guangzhou. At the time, it was called Canton. In Hong Kong, of course, Martha spoke, visited libraries, and published newspaper articles. But I don't want to talk about those. I want to talk about one aspect of Martha's travels that doesn't get a lot of attention, and Hong Kong is a perfect example. Even though Martha never stayed long anywhere, everywhere she went, on top of all the energy she was spending proclaiming the faith, she made a strenuous effort to involve herself in the local community. So Mabel Garris again tells us in Lioness at the Threshold something absolutely remarkable, that during the 2 months Martha was in Hong Kong, she found the time to start 2 clubs, a public questions club and a musical club devoted to Western classical music. During her time in Hong Kong, she did a short jaunt to Canton, which is Guangzhou today, and it was the capital of the nationalist government, the Kuomintang, KMT, led by Sun Yat-sen. This is a photograph of Sun Yat-sen at the Second National Congress of the KMT. And this is Sun Yat-sen himself, one of the most important political figures of China, leader of the Kuomintang. You see him in this picture as well. He is chairing the First National Congress of the Kuomintang on January 24th, 1924, 3 months before his meeting with Martha Root. And this is him in 1912, 12 years before, when he was the first provisional president of the Republic of China. Sun Yat-sen listened to Martha's presentation of the Baha'i teachings and asked her to send him 2 Baha'i books. This is a photograph of Sun Yat-sen and his wife Song Qingling, a Chinese politician, taken in 1924, the year he met Martha Root. Chapter 7, Southeast Asia. In May 1924, Martha took a 4-day trip down the China Sea to Vietnam and Cambodia. She was the only passenger on an immaculate little cargo boat named the Lorestan. The voyage was blessed unusually for Martha with calm seas and good weather. And in Saigon, Martha was very happy to meet the only female editor in all of China, a young French woman named Madame Boeuf. She was the editor of the English section of L'Information de l'Extrême-Orient, which is sort of the Gazette of the Far East, and she published 3 long articles about the Baha'i faith. I'm very proud of this slide because this is actually the place where Martha spoke, Le Collège Chasluluba in Saigon. She gave a lecture to 650 Vietnamese, Chinese, and French students that was pre-approved by the governor of Indochina. This is the only article I was able to find from Vietnam from Martha's time there, but I want to quote France Indochine's very accurate analysis about Martha's talk because I've never read a journalist describe it so well. A pacifist lecture. Miss Martha Root gave a talk in English on ways to establish universal peace and the role that young people in schools can play in that regard. The talk was very clear, very simple, free of dogmatism, and interested the audience. And that is a key point that Mabel Garris makes very often in her biography, is that Martha did not give complicated talks. She gave straight to the point talks, and she fascinated people because of her way of delivering talks. May 1924, Cambodia. Martha fell in love with Cambodian culture and its people, its extraordinary architecture and enigmatic ruins. She sampled all the available modes of transportation, from rickshaws to elephants, and the sampans, those beautiful boats. June 1924, Manila. On her way from Hong Kong to Australia, Martha Root stopped in Manila in the Philippines. Around the end of May, the beginning of June 1924, Martha Root was the first Baha'i to visit the Philippines, and she gave 1 single lecture while she was in Manila, which was printed in the newspaper. This single talk, single article, single newspaper is a story of the enduring effect of Martha's talks and newspaper articles until today. Shortly after her lecture was printed in 1924, a young Filipino, Felix Madela, bought some cheese wrapped in a newspaper. You guessed it, the newspaper carried Martha Root's article. Felix had been searching for a long time for a religion that could satisfy his yearning soul, and he had just discovered it in the most unexpected way. Martha Root's single lecture in Manila found its way into the hearts of the first Filipino Baha'i. And Felix Medela and his entire family became Baha'is, and that is how the faith began in the Philippines. Thanks to Martha's incessant efforts to lecture and publish newspaper articles about the Baha'i faith, Martha had managed to reach millions of people in Southeast Asia who had never heard of Baha'u'llah. Chapter 8, Australia. June 1924, Melbourne. Martha left the boiling summer of Southeast Asia, and she traded it with the winter of Australia in late May 1924. She sailed from Manila to Thursday Island at the very north of Australia to Melbourne at the very south. Martha received an extravagant welcome from the small Baha'i community of Australia. Dozens of bouquets, baskets of fruit, an assortment of gifts, and money to defray the expenses of her trip. Of course, whenever Martha was given money, she would only ever use it for Baha'i literature to be printed or travel expenses and visas. Never once did she use it for anything remotely personal. Martha spent 2 days resting in Melbourne and selling everything she could part with, beads, necklaces, and clothes, to replenish her funds. After that, Martha crossed the entire Australian continent from east to west by train, an astounding 5-day, 3,400-kilometer, 2,100-mile train journey offered to her by Clara and Hyde Dunn. June, July 1924, Perth. Clara and Hyde Dunn had left everything behind in California to come to Australia in 1920 in response to Abdul Baha's tablets of the Divine Plan. Shoghi Effendi later appointed both of them hands of the cause. Hyde Dunn posthumously and Clara Dunn in 1951. Or I can't remember if it was 1951 or... They were the first Baha'is to set foot in Australia and New Zealand, and they established the community in Australia. This is a picture of them at the first National Convention of the Baha'is of Australia and New Zealand in 1934. Martha stayed with the Dunns. This is a picture of her at the Dunns' home. They were called Father and Mother Dunn. She was in a lot of pain again, and Clara massaged her back to ease the nagging pain. Martha spent the month of July 1924 in Perth. She lectured 38 times. She was there on 19th of July, 1924, when the first local spiritual assembly of Perth was formed. Because I couldn't find one of those, this is a picture of Hyde and Clara Dunn in the center on the first National Spiritual Assembly of Australia and New Zealand in 1934. It was in Perth that Martha made her debut on the radio. It was a tremendous success. Martha had the perfect radio voice, and that is something she would do consistently from here on out in all of her trips. Now, this is a beautiful photograph from Perth with Martha Root on the left, Clara Dunn, Effie Baker, and Mrs. Tapscott, quote unquote, the landlady. Thank you to the National Baha'i Archives for this picture. August 1924, Melbourne. Martha and Effie Baker, who was the second Australian Baha'i, traveled back to Melbourne on the East Coast. Martha gave 25 lectures in 25 days. The publicity was extraordinary, and everywhere she went, Martha was treated like a celebrity. It's a beautiful picture of Martha with the women of the Australian Baha'i community, and it's important because Martha's visit to Australia was extremely significant. Most of the Baha'is in Australia were women, and they took Martha as an example of what a woman could do if she arose alone and promoted the ideas of the principles she believed in. She was utterly inspirational, and from now on, the legend of Martha Root grows in Baha'i circles, and she becomes this amazing inspiration for young girls and women of all ages, really. Chapter 9, New Zealand. September, October 1924, Auckland. In mid-September 1924, Martha and Effie Baker sailed from Sydney to Auckland, New Zealand. This is a photo of Martha in Auckland in September 1924 with Effie Baker, Margaret Stevenson, and Lilias Stevenson. Martha really enjoyed being busy, and the Baha'is of New Zealand really, they made her so happy. She was so happy about how busy they kept her that she wrote to her friends back in the United States with glee, telling them that she had had 19 venues for her talks in 12 days, including the first Baha'i lecture in any church in New Zealand, with a special mention for Wellington, which she was especially happy about because she gave 5 talks in a single day, which was her personal record. This is a photograph of Martha I've used before, but it was actually taken in Sydney in 1924 and used in a ton of newspaper articles. Martha liked to call this picture her glamour shot. October 7th to 17th, leaving Australia. So then Martha and Effie sailed back to Sydney on the 7th of October, 1924. And Martha spent 2 days resting, and she found something that worked for her. She thought, okay, I can do this. I can arrive in a city and rest before I meet the Baha'is, before I throw myself into the action. She would do this more and more whenever she could. One of the highlights of the 20 lectures she gave in Sydney was an outdoor talk Martha gave on a large truck, where she stood on the truck and shouted to be heard by 1,000 Australians. Martha managed also to travel to Tasmania, where there were only 4 Baha'is, and her trip was reported there also in the news, as you'll see in a minute. So looking back on her 1924 tour of the Antipodes, Martha said, and I have to just take a drink because I can't believe that she said this, but she's so incredible. This is what Martha said after giving almost 100 talks. I don't know. It was due entirely to the unselfish work of the Duns, the foundation they laid, and their exemplary lives, which created a unity and to spread beauty and energy along their path. Only such a pure soul as Martha Root would credit someone else for her incredible Herculean work that she had just done. Now, Mabel Garris says she gave 60 talks. I think she gave more because if you count the ones in New Zealand, it's probably closer to 80. But look at the publicity in Australia alone. Her visit spilled ink. In every major newspaper in Australia, this is Australian articles, these are New Zealand articles, and these are Tasmanian articles. Martha single-handedly brought the faith to the attention of people in Australia and New Zealand. Oh, and you noticed, right? This is her glamour shot that was used in the in the articles. Can you imagine how thrilling it must have been for the Baha'is to have her? Chapter 10, South Africa. November 1924, sailing to South Africa. Martha boarded the Balronald, the ship you see here in Melbourne, then sailed out of Adelaide on November 13th, 1924, bound for Cape Town, and her body crashed. Martha was extremely ill during the first part of the journey, the longest single journey ever for Martha at 18,000 kilometers or 11,000 miles. Now, one of the ship's officers had the deep kindness to move Martha out of her shared cabin and into a suite free of charge, and then he sent her a basket of fruit. Everyone on the ship spoiled Martha, and Martha shaled the piles and piles and piles of goodies that the Australian Baha'is had given her, including Nestle chocolate, and shared everything with the passengers. And when she got better, she gave 2 talks on board the ship and 3 talks in 24 hours during a layover in Durban. Love Martha. December 1924, January 1925, Cape Town. This is a photograph of Martha and Fanny Knobloch. Martha sailed into Cape Town on 8 December 1924 and was greeted by Fanny Knobloch, who was the first Baha'i to come to South Africa in 1920. Martha loved Cape Town. She was inspired by its strategic importance at the crossroads of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, and was moved by the beautiful flower markets filled with a magnificent variety of orchids gathered every morning from the mountains. By now, wherever she arrived, Martha had to deal with a huge deluge of correspondence, the volume of which simply stunned Fanny. Martha's travel was a real challenge to the secretaries of The Guardian, who had a very hard time keeping track of where in the world Martha was to send, where in the world Martha was in order to send her letters from Shoghi Effendi. But Martha had a system. Wherever she went in the world, she would tell her friends the approximate days for her trips. So they would say if they wanted to write to her, they knew that a letter would take 2 weeks to arrive, and they would send it to the American consulate for where she said she would be at that time. And Martha always left money with a previous consulate to forward her mail to the next consulate. These are all vintage photos of consulates from the early 20th century. So during her month in Cape Town from December 1924 to January 1925, Martha was treated like a star, and she gave 30 lectures, and 4 of which were broadcast on the radio. The intensity of Martha's stay between large lectures and small gatherings, individual meetings and radio interviews was her usual rhythm, but also her strategy. She expended her energy fully, sowing seeds in fertile ground, which the pioneers and Baha'is she was leaving behind would then nurture and grow. This is not significant, but I like this story. Martha, when she was in Cape Town, met a Baha'i whose name was Mrs. H. And Mrs. H had sent Abdul Baha chincherinches. These are the flowers you see at the bottom here. They're white flowers that are very long-lasting and endemic to Cape Town. She sent them to Abdul Baha while he was in London, and word is Abdul Baha received the chincherinches in perfect condition. January 1st, 1925. You know, at the beginning of this talk, I shared a tablet of Abdul Baha that really changed Martha's life. And I think that, in a way, this letter of January 1st, 1925 also changed Martha's life. The Guardian would continue to encourage her, always emphasizing her role in planting seeds that would later bloom. I assure you that you are never forgotten. You are under his wings. He will surely guide you and lead you to success. I indeed have nothing to add, for your work is perfect. Your efforts magnificent. Your achievements glorious. I pray you may achieve your heart's desire. It's impossible to imagine what this letter from The Guardian must have meant to Martha, struggling with her health to take every single step forward and yet flying to the summits of heroism every time. January 12th to the 27th, Johannesburg and Durban. Martha traveled by train to Johannesburg. The former mayor of Cape Town loved her so much he bought her a first-class train ticket. But she arrived in Cape Town with a completely new health problem that would continue to plague her, which was altitude and her fragile heart. Johannesburg is a very, very elevated city. It's 1,700 meters above sea level, 5,700 feet above sea level, and she was forced to limit her activities to only twice a day. Martha had absolutely adored her time in Southern Africa. It was the only time she would ever set foot in Africa, actually. She would never return. And she was deeply touched by the South Africans' intense kindness. And she said, the people of South Africa are so hospitable and kind. They are beautiful, and the sunshine of South Africa makes it one of the most lovely countries in the world. Chapter 11. East Africa. February-March 1925, the eastern coast of Africa. During her first week in February 1925, traveling third class on the Landstuffen Castle, which you see here, the ship became a vehicle for a historic event. Martha would be the first Baha'i to step foot in and bring the Baha'i teachings to 3 African countries: Mozambique, Tanzania, and Kenya. Now, Martha wrote in a letter dated on 2nd February 1925 that her ship stopped 19 times before docking in Port Said. I found the ship manifest for the ship, but those stops must have been minor ones, and she stopped apparently at every stop, all of those 19 stops. But I was only able to find 8 on the ship manifest. The 8 stops I found were after leaving Durban. I found Maputo, Mozambique, where she gave 2 lectures, Beira, Mozambique, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, Zanzibar, Tanzania, where Martha brought the Baha'i principles and gave Baha'i pamphlets to Khalifa bin Kharub, the Sultan of Zanzibar, this handsome man you see here. Then Tanga, Tanzania, Mombasa, Kenya, Aden, Yemen, Port Sudan in the Sudan, Port Suez in Egypt, and Port Said. And the ship went on to Genoa and London. But while Martha was traveling, she caught, as if she needed this, she caught malaria on the journey. And so malaria is a terrible, terrible illness. I've had it. It's one of the worst. It is the worst illness I've ever had. Your body shakes with chills and then spikes with fevers and then chills again. And you have severe headaches and nausea, and everything doesn't work in your body. And it never leaves. It lives in your liver, actually. So Martha recovered from the malaria, but it must have taken a toll. And as soon as she felt better, as always, every time she stopped action, she felt ill, every time. And she started spending time with the other passengers and gave a talk to 500 people on the ship as she sailed up the Red Sea, which you see here from a satellite photograph. And I like this photograph because you can see what Martha is saying. She was sailing up the Red Sea, and she said it was on the one side, on the left, the land of Mecca, and on the right, on the west, the land of Moses. So this is really just an amazing sea. So as she was sailing up the coast of the Sudan during her talk, she talked about Haji Mirza Haidar Ali, the angel of Carmel, who spent 8 years imprisoned in a prison in Khartoum in the Sudan, and his inconceivable sufferings for Baha'u'llah. The audience was stunned into a silent hush and then broke into applause. Now, Haji Mirza Haidar Ali's life is very, very important and very inspirational. And really, if you can, there is a video on the Clearwater website that I made a couple of years ago about his life in 3 parts, and it will make you cry. His sufferings are so amazing. And when asked about them later in life, he said, "I have not done as much as an ant would do in service to Baha'u'llah." Martha disembarked in Port Said, her head singing, her heart singing. Her most cherished dream was about to come true. She was going on pilgrimage. Chapter 12, Martha's first pilgrimage. March 13th, 1925, Haifa. Martha arrived in Haifa finally at long last on March 13th, 1925, 10 years, if you remember, after her first attempt to visit Abdul Baha in 1915 during World War I. Saichiro Fujita welcomed her warmly at the train station. And this is him, the famous Saichiro Fujita, the gardener with a gigantic sunflower. So Martha knew this about Saichiro Fujita. She knew he was an avid gardener. So despite her insane schedule, she managed to bring him seeds from South Africa and had the thought and the care and the love and the kindness. Oh, so I love her. She asked her friends from Australia and New Zealand to also bring him seeds. The holy shrines. Martha's first few moments at the Shrine of the Bab were vivid and powerful. Being in the Shrine of the Bab really brought forth to her the youthfulness of the Bab, his heroism, his martyrdom, and the heroic journey of his remains from Iran, to Haifa. But experience in the Shrine of Abdul Baha, which is next door, was really different. She really felt the powerful, welcoming, loving, compassionate presence of Abdul Baha, the Abdul Baha that she had known and met. And she had been at this occasion that you see here, which is the picnic, the unity feast at Roy Wilhelm's cabin in Teaneck, New Jersey. The greatest holy leaf One of the richest experiences of Martha's pilgrimage was the time she was able to spend in the company of Bahiye Hanum, greatest holy leaf, daughter of Baha'u'llah, sister of Abdul Baha. The doctors had told the greatest holy leaf not to get out of bed, but she also did not like obeying doctors. So she refused to miss out on meeting the lady pilgrims, most especially Martha Root. Martha was so moved by the greatest holy leaf's presence. There is no detail, even for your physical comfort, too small for her to provide for. And as for your spirit, almost unconsciously, she trains you to meet your life with joy and courage. You suddenly feel what a wonderful gift she has given you. The treasure of seeing how one can live a heavenly life on an earth plane full of troubles. Yeah, it's a good way to describe Bahiye Hanum. So like her brother in that way, Abdul Baha, they both lived saintly heavenly lives on a planet that was so filled with misery and imperfection, pain and suffering. It's the only picture of Shoghi Effendi and Bahiye Hanum together. The greatest holy leaf gave Martha a little gold ring with a soft red glowing stone engraved with the glory of God, the greatest name. Memories of Abdul Baha. During her pilgrimage, Martha absorbed story after story about Abdul Baha, stories of generosity and detachment and kindness and love that just fused themselves into her soul and that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Martha also had time to spend time with John Stannard. John Stannard was Shoghi Effendi's secretary, and at the time she arrived on pilgrimage, he was in the hospital. He had contracted tuberculosis and he would never leave the hospital. He would never recover. He would die 8 months later on November 22nd, 1925. Dr. Stannard was a brilliant doctor and a master Esperantist, and Martha learned a great deal from him in a short time. Forever after, Stannard would be the standard of perfection for Esperanto for Martha. But he would become a part of the rest of her life in another way. He had just published Baha'u'llah and the New Era, 3.5 chapters of which had been edited by Abdul Baha. Martha would fall in love with Baha'u'llah and the New Era, and she would spend the rest of her life translating it. Martha's heart broke at seeing Shoghi Effendi work so hard through meals. She described the guardian as so spiritually beautiful. Every time I am with him, I am so happy. He radiates joy and love to everybody. His mind seems all comprehensive. He grasps the big problems and always knows just what to do. His translations are great, but he tries to dictate letters and perhaps add a few lines. And doing this for all the world is taking his strength just terribly. It is not giving him time for the other big questions which are crowding. You have no idea how many letters come asking questions he wishes all to write. His joy is to hear the news of the cause, but it is the answering that is going to kill him. You know, the last day that Shoghi Effendi was alive, he was answering letters. During her pilgrimage, Martha spent time with Shoghi Effendi, once praying in the shrines. You see here the terraces in the early 20th century. And other times, they spoke about Martha's teaching work and Shoghi Effendi's goals. Shoghi Effendi shared with her that he had discovered new tablets that he had not known about revealed by Abdul Baha about Iran's future, but he also encouraged Martha to continue concentrating all her energies on teaching the faith, promoting Esperanto, and publicizing the persecutions in Iran, where there were some at the time. The Guardian also gave Martha a very, very special assignment. He wanted her to open the International Bahá'í Bureau in Geneva with the help of Jean Stannard. Martha acted on the Guardian's assignment immediately. Chapter 13, Switzerland. May-June 1925, the International Bahá'í Bureau. In 1925, just as it is today, Geneva was global city, a financial center, and a worldwide center for diplomacy because of all the international organizations that were headquartered there. And as the home of the League of Nations, it was a center for peace, for justice, and for education. Jean Stannard arrived in Geneva a little bit after Martha, and they opened the International Bahá'í Bureau, which would open an entirely new field of endeavor, one that would last until today with the work of the international Bahá'í community, and would raise the global profile of the Bahá'í faith and its place at the nerve center of world events. And this is a photograph of the International Bahá'í Bureau in 1925, and Martha is second from the left in standing. August 2nd to the 7th, 1925, the 17th Universal Esperanto Congress. The 17th Universal Esperanto Congress, which you see here, took place in Geneva from August 2nd to August 7th, 1925, and thousands of Esperantists attended. There were 2 Baha'i sessions, which were very well prepared by Martha Root, extremely well presented, 25 countries attended, and it was the beginning of a friendship that would last until the end of Martha's life. It was at this Congress that Martha met Lydia Zamenhof, one of the daughters of the late Dr. Zamenhof, inventor of the Esperanto language. Chapter 14, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Serbia. November to December 1925, Germany and Austria. Leaving Switzerland around early November 1926, after a spell of illness following the Esperanto Congress, Martha traveled to Germany and visited Stuttgart, Frankfurt, and Karlsruhe. At every stop, Martha was entertained by intellectuals, bankers, business people, and the familiar groups who always sought her out wherever she arrived. Martha spent a month in Vienna, lecturing every day. This is the hotel where Abdu'l-Baha stayed in Vienna. The most significant event of Martha's time in Vienna, other than realizing she had misjudged the city at first, and then it turned out to be an amazing experience, so she never made that mistake again, was that she met Marianne Hainisch on the left here. This is a photograph of a young Marianne Hainisch in 1872, but in 1925, she was the mother of Austria's current president, Michael Hainisch, on the right. And what's amazing about Marianne Hainisch is that she was an active supporter of women's rights, and she had discovered the Baha'i faith on her own through discovering the poems of Tahirih, who had become her greatest inspiration. And she would always say, "I want to do for the women of Austria what Tahirih did for the women of Iran." This is an important section. How Martha went through a city. On the 29th of December, 1925, Martha wrote to Ella Cooper, and she described in detail her actual spiritual process for going through a city every single time. "When I once get started in a city, I do not even stop to write a postcard to my relatives. Everything goes like the rushing sweep of the Holy Spirit. Then nothing material matters, and Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'u'llah help me, and the people of the city help. Rather, they do it all. I just pray, listen to the guidance, and act, but it is a very happy time." You see how the Holy Spirit comes again as the motive power, the reason for Martha's moving forward. End of December 1925, Budapest, Hungary. Martha reached Budapest around December 25th, 1925, and was immediately faced with a whole kebab of problems. She broke a corner of her front tooth, which meant an incredibly expensive dentist's bill. A porter broke one of her suitcases. Her flat iron broke. She had to pay 7 different kinds of taxes on her hotel room. And I want to thank the National Baha'i Archives of the United States. These 7 documents, which I pretended they were taxes, they're actually hotel bills from 7 different hotels from Martha. They're actually original hotel bills from Martha Root. The visas she needed for the next part of her travels amounted to a whopping $3,500 in today's currency. Fun fact, thank you to the National Archives, because these are all the next visas that she bought for $3,500. This is actually images from a scan of her passport from 1926 to 1928. So can you imagine the logistical planning that went into Martha's trips? She had to apply and fill out paperwork for every single one of these visas in advance and pay for them. This is the currency of Hungary at the time that Martha was there. Everything in Budapest was 3 times more expensive than in Vienna because of the soaring inflation. I told you I was going to literally talk about bananas. A single solitary banana cost Martha $9 in today's currency. Despite these initial problems, Martha got a discount at the hotel that allowed her to stay at the Ritz, the very hotel Abdul Baha had stayed at when he came to Budapest in 1913. She found the Hungarians to be incredibly receptive to the faith. She spoke to crowded venues, and on her last day, she received visitors from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. She worked through lunch and dinner and received 9 people at a time sometimes. This is the terrace of the Ritz, Martha's Hotel. In mid-January 1926, in the middle of winter, Martha took a cold and crowded train from Budapest to Belgrade, Serbia, then boarded a train through the Carpathian Mountains, and after skirting the Danube, arrived in Bucharest, Romania. Martha Root was about to make Baha'i history and bring the faith to the Queen of Romania. Thank you very much, everyone. That's it for me today. See you next week. We're going to spend all of next week with Queen Marie of Romania. Please share this video with your friends.